An art journal tutorial from the desk of Creative Katie, Karen Burchill. Today I'm going to showcase 4 ways to use stencils. A couple of them are things that you've rarely seen me do. I also challenged myself to use these Liquitex Acrylic Inks. They're in my stash. I loved them when I bought them. Now I need to get using them. You can click on the iCard to see me make the sprays that I make using these Liquitex acrylic inks. So I'm just shaking up the bottles and getting ready to spray right through the stencil. So there's number 1 way of using a stencil, spraying through a stencil. And the reason I don't often spray through a stencil is because many of the sprays aren't permanent. They reactivate and they make such a mess, which is why I tried to make these inks or these sprays out of the acrylic ink. I made these sprays a year ago. They have not clogged the sprayers. I was pleasantly surprised. So here I'm using muted gray. That's the one that's coming up purple, and muted green, which is more teal. I love this color combination, and I'm using 3 different of my favorite stencils. And to the inks and the stencils, there will be links below in the description box. So I'm just spraying and then I'm flipping it over and basically stamping with it, getting it rub off, and it gives a different impression. I just want some interest in the background. Now I'm absolutely loving these colors. Now, my next layer, I am going to decoupage down some of this Tim Holtz collage paper. This one's called Typeset, I believe. And I had little bits from a past project, so I grabbed those, and then I wanted to add a little bit more. This is adding some contrast. Now, because this is on tissue paper, when I glue this down with the fluid matte medium from Liquitex, the white parts go translucent and you still see the color, whatever's behind it is going to show through. And because those Liquitex acrylic inks are permanent when they're dry, they do not reactivate. If you were to use some other sprays, if they're not permanent, they would reactivate and smudge as soon as I started gluing these down. So I'm just gluing this down, building interest into the background. Right now, I have no idea about focal images. I don't have a pre idea of where I want to go. I just wanted to do something different, use something that was in my stash that I haven't used lately. I bought the whole set of the muted Liquitex inks. I think there are 5 or 6 in that pack. As I just showed on the screen, a recap of all the steps and stages using my prompt and process cards is at the end of the video. Using the collage papers are a quick way to add lots of little bits of interest to your background. I'm ripping the edges. I don't like the straight edges. And I'm just filling it in. Using tissue papers like this means that you don't have to take out how many different stamps. The second way I'm using a stencil is I'm putting thick gesso rubbing it through the stencil. Now the gesso that I'm using is actually a regular gesso. It's a store brand economy gesso that I bought in a local art shop, but it had the tendency to thicken. And while I didn't like it as my gesso, I love it for this purpose. So I buy it now with the idea that I know it's going to thicken and I can use it for this. But you can buy thick gesso from different companies and do it this way. Now I'm using those acrylic inks and I'm going to attempt drippage here. I'm putting some of that ink on and just letting it get into the nooks and the crannies of the rubbed on gesso. Now you're going to want to make sure that that gesso or modeling paste is completely dry because you're adding more water to it and that could soften it, which could cause problems. So you need to make sure that that's dry. While I dried mine, it wasn't completely dry. And I quickly go from drippage to just putting this in. And I want to, some areas of this, I want a little bit darker color. I want to build a little bit more interest by using, again, the same two colors, the muted green, that's what this is, and the muted gray, which is shows up purple, which I love. And it's just catching in the nooks and the crannies and showcasing the texture. You want to be able to see that texture, and this is one way that you can highlight it. And I'm just building up to a color that I like. Now I'm taking a teal or a phthalo green and gray and mixing it to make that same color. And I'm stenciling on just the traditional stenciling way. Like I just wanted to add a little bit more um, of the same pattern that I had from spraying it. And it's a little bit darker. Now I have this color from Liquitex, which is actually called purple, gray purple. Now here's a technique. I am putting acrylic paint on the stencil, rubbing it on the stencil, really globbing it on, and then pressing or stamping with the stencil. And this is giving another kind of effect. It's reversing the stencil from what you would get if I was stenciling on it. It's very imprecise. You're not going to get a perfect stencil, but for adding marks and interest, I love this. And I definitely will be stamping with stencils again. I think maybe I would next time put it on a gel plate, get lots of it on it, and then transferring it. But this way worked too. Although I admit it was messy. My whole hand was covered and my table was covered as well. So if you want more muted colors, take your color and mix it with a gray or add a smidge of black. And that will get you into that muted color palette. I absolutely love this background, the way the Tim Holtz papers are showing through, the way the colors, you get that watercolory effect. I didn't know what to do. So when I don't know what to do, what focal image to use, nothing was coming to mind. I'm edging it with black using the floating acrylic technique in my angle brush. Needed to trim off a little bit of that excess. Just wanted to frame this, and sometimes doing this step now helps me think of what I want to do. I like the amount of white that's on there. I like the peeking of the black through there from the Tim Holtz backgrounds. And that's okay. You don't always have to know exactly what the next step is. This could sit on my desk or in my book for a while till I come up with the perfect focal image for it. And I did walk away. We had lunch. Now, here's the fourth way that I'm using a stencil. I'm using this stencil as a focal image, and I'm using black because I've got a lot going on in that background, and I want more of that contrast. This had some big open spaces. It wasn't too fine. So there are certain stencils that are more suited to focal images, and this sunflower one is definitely one of them. I believe it's called Joyful Sunflower, and this is the 12-inch one. I'm using a makeup sponge and applying black paint. If your stencils move, take some time, use some painter's tape, and tack them down. When you're stenciling, slow and easy. You can build up, go over it again. Now, I love this right here, and I wish I had left it at this and had omitted the next step that I do. So if I was doing it again, that's what I would learn, which is ties into the quote that I use for this page. Here's the part that, while I like it, I think I liked it better with just the straight black. Here I'm just using my fine line bottle and doodling around all the black images. Using the fine line applicator is a quick way to outline lots. But you could use a Posca pen or Uniball Signo. But this is acrylic paint, so it is permanent when dry, and it's very opaque. So my quote comes from my Embrace Possibility sentiment pack, and there's a link to where you can purchase those in the description box. And my sentiment here says there is no failure. You win or you learn. And we need to approach our art journal pages like that. You need to take a chance. Yeah, it may not be the best choice, but then you've learned, and next time you'll make a different choice. Or you're going to discover something amazing, like using those sprays, like using the Tim Holtz collage papers, and liking the combination, the watercolor effect. Now I wanted the top part of that sentiment to stand out a little bit more. So I grabbed a piece of just my copy paper and I'm painting it black. I thought I had enough on the table, but I didn't. Just painting it black, and I'm going to use that to frame the top part of that sentiment and add the contrast of the black. So now I'm just going to cut this to the size that I like. Someone recently asked, like, how do you choose the fonts? I like getting fonts that are all caps. It makes it easy to cut into the rectangular shapes, or script fonts. I also like ones that are bolder because they tend to stand out on the page. And then often I will addition the sentiments on the page. Sometimes it's you need fewer words, sometimes it's the orientation of the page. Now here I'm just marking the center. If that matters to you, you can mark off the center. You can measure. Usually I eyeball it. But if you aren't good at eyeballing it, get out your ruler. Do whatever helps you get the effect you want. And with this sentiment, I left out one of the words. It didn't fit the composition and it didn't affect the sentiment. Just using my Posca pen and in black and going around it just to highlight it a little bit. I do come and use the floating acrylic shading technique and go around it, or I use the charcoal pencil. I'm not sure which I do. I liked using that sunflower stencil in non-typical sunflower colors. And that's another chance. Here I'm using the General's charcoal pencil. If you like my tutorials, click the subscribe button, click on the bell, and select the option of being notified when I release a new video. Typically, I get 2 to 3 videos a week, every second day. But if you select to be notified, you can get a thumbnail of it and see what's up and just make a decision about whether that's something that you're going to want to watch. Then I'm just adding a little bit more with the charcoal pencil. The charcoal is not permanent. It would reactivate, but I'm using it at this stage because I'm not adding anything after this. I know I'm not adding any water or wet medium. If this was on a canvas, I would spray it if I had used charcoal. I don't varnish my art journal pages. So there is the finished page, and I absolutely love that background and how this came together. So I started by spraying with my acrylic ink DIY sprays through stencils. Spraying through the stencil, flipping the stencil, and pressing it down, getting a lot of that watercolory marks on the background. Then I collaged down Tim Holtz collage papers. This was the Typeset one that added contrast with the black. I stenciled a few areas, 3, with thick gesso. I added drippage and it went through and showed off that texture from the thick gesso through the stencil. I stamped with my stencil to get that reverse stencil look, and I'm loving that technique. I'm going to definitely use that more. I edged the page here just to frame it and give me some time to think about the focal image. I stenciled a little bit. I added contrast with the black stenciling of that sunflower. I outlined or doodled around with my fine line applicator, and then I added the sentiment, framing it in black to give a little bit more contrast. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope I've given you some ideas that you can try. Follow me on Instagram. And until next time, go get creative.